I'd like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. Sammy, if you could go first, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sammy Scott. I graduated in the class of 2015. I was part of the first cohort of media studies majors, and I had what did I minor in? Oh my God, African American studies. Right now, I'm doing social media consulting. I've worked in social through college into real life. Um, and I'm based in Brooklyn.
Great. Ranjit?
Hey everyone, great to be on this call. My name is Ranjit Raju, and graduation year was 2008 college. I majored in film studies. I think I was part of the first class when we introduced the new film production program. So part of the first class for that, and currently I support and manage strategic customers at Amazon Web Services, part of the Amazon organization, located out of Los Angeles.
Great, thank you. And Anjali?
Hi, I'm Anjali Patel. I graduated in 2018. I was a film studies major, and then I did the media management concentration with the B School. I live in LA and I moved out here since graduation, and I've worked in TV development. And right now I'm at Amazon Studios, working for the head of TV development.
Great. Thank you all so much. Alexis, did you want to ask the first question?
Absolutely. Thank you all for introducing yourself, and I'm very excited for this programming this evening. I'm curious, because Emory offers a plethora of different majors within the humanities department, how and why specifically did you decide the major that you ended up graduating in? And looking back, what were some of the most important courses that you took, or the experiences that you encountered and pursued? They could be study abroad, internships, et cetera, that are related to your major.
I can start. So initially, I was dead set on being a sociology major. I wrote about it in all my essays for every school I applied to. And I really enjoyed the sociology classes that I was taking. But when I took Intro to Film Studies with Matthew Bernstein, like, it opened up my world. So by the time I got to senior year, they had made media studies a major. When I had started, it was a minor. And basically, like, the week before Add Drop Swap ended, I was like, okay, we're switching it up, we're changing things, we're doing it different. And I'm really glad that I made that choice. So yeah, Intro to Film Studies was amazing. I see Dr. Allison somewhere in here. I took Digital Media and Culture. Hi. That was really great too, because that was the first time in an academic setting that I got to explore and talk about digital media and social media, because before that it was just me, like, being on Zanga, MySpace, Twitter, Tumblr, like every single thing you could be on, kind of like as an individual and as a person. But I was like, okay, there's like an academic and pedagogical like thing happening behind this, and also I know that I can do this as a career. So that was really exciting. And then beyond that, I was part of Black Star Magazine for all 4 years of college. So I started out as an editor and eventually was editor-in-chief. And that like sparked my interest in magazines as well.
I forgot to mention this earlier, just a little bit of housekeeping. All opinions are my own. I'm not representing Amazon in an official capacity. I was told I have to say that. So I figure it's assumed though. Anyway, so yeah, I originally, I was pre-med. I think there were some similarities to Sammy's story a bit there too. Not the pre-med part, of course, but yeah, I was pre-med, was going through all of those required courses. And I think I was in the middle of organic chemistry, which I don't think I'm the first person to reconsider their life choices while taking organic chemistry. So I had a GER I needed to fulfill and decided to take that in film. Intro to Film at that time was taught by Professor Evan Lieberman. So it was really, and I don't think I'm the only one to say this, we had a number of graduates from '08, end up moving out to Los Angeles or stay in Atlanta or move to New York, just basically major film and media and entertainment hubs, all of whom quoted Professor Lieberman's course as the entree to a larger film and media and entertainment career. So I think his teaching style, as well as additional courses I was taking under Professor Eddie von Mueller at the time, both of which unfortunately are not at the university anymore, but just provided this foundational level knowledge, and I think really inspiration that that there was this larger culture and as well as global storytelling community around filmmaking that it was possible to participate in, possible to to have a career in, and that in and of itself was very exciting to me. I still finished my pre-med requirements, to my parents' wishes, but essentially, pursued a course in film studies. Took additional courses around global film cultures, anime, Mexican film, etc., and just consumed as much as I could around the major, around that coursework. I think part of your question tied into sort of additional pieces like study abroad and internships. I did participate in a study abroad program. Went to Prague my junior year. Prague is one of the I'd say one of the kind of meccas of film culture, if I could use that term, but it's essentially a central point for film culture, the film community, and really just affirmed a love of film, but also provided a perspective and level of engagement on film production that you can't necessarily get with just consuming the film theory side and film history side alone. Although all of those really make up the whole in terms of a production career. I also pursued a number of internships, kind of starting in around my sophomore and junior year. Started taking the summers to do internships around film and around medicine at the time. So kind of pursued both until it was very clear that I'd be continuing that career path around filmmaking. I'd just say, I also. In terms of guidance around that, also looking at opportunities and involvement in the local business community when it comes to filmmaking, or again, opportunities related to those internships was a pretty big factor in terms of my experience.
Ranjit's clearly more important than me, but I guess I'm going to echo the same Amazon thing that he said, because same, I don't know. But I knew I wanted to do film when I got to Emory, because all the other classes I felt like were super boring, and I'd done some film in high school. And so then I took Dr. Allison's freshman seminar that used to be Intro to Film, and I really enjoyed it. And I met a lot of the professors, and I was like, okay, everyone's really cool. But I think what really set me on my course of what I wanted to do after college was also digital media and culture, because it was the first time that I realized that the TV business was also booming, because we were live tweeting an episode of Empire and doing all of these very fun sort of non-traditional media activities. And so that, in combination with the film trek, where Dr. Bernstein took a bunch of us to LA to meet agents and meet Emory alumni in the business, really solidified that LA was a path and TV was very much alive and a booming business. But all that being said, I did really enjoy the theory classes, and I think it helps to have a film background going into these conversations where people are constantly referencing old movies or talking about things that are Rashomon style, all of these fun buzzwords that you go in knowing is really helpful.
Thank you. That's a great segue. I love the shout out. Thank you to the theory and history as being important, and we can maybe talk more about that. But if you cast your mind back to once you had declared a film studies or a media studies major, what did you imagine yourself doing after you graduated? And then what were the actual steps that you took professionally after you did graduate? Sammy, do you want to start again?
Oh, sorry, I was muted. I know, Sage, relax. My dog is doing a lot right now. So basically, after my freshman year, I had my first social media internship. I knew at the time, like, I was interested in magazines. I was interested in like figuring out the professional aspect of being on social besides like, you know, tweeting all day. And that kind of set me on my path. And it was basically figuring out, okay, what major and what classes can I cobble together to make this work? And then once I got to my senior year and I actually declared, I was like, oh, this makes so much sense. Like, I get what I was trying to do. Once I graduated, it was really about, you know, utilizing my network and applying and applying and applying and applying. I did get my first job pretty quickly. And funny enough, the CEO is an Emory alum as well. My first job, I worked at the Shorty Awards, and I was an associate producer. If y'all are not familiar, it's like a social media award show, which is fascinating. And I worked on the business side and things like that. But being able to make that Emory connection, it's like frustrating to think about, but like who you know really does matter in a lot of respects. But it was a great first experience in terms of like figuring out the media and entertainment industry and where I wanted to be.
Great. And just as a follow-up, how did you connect with that Emory alum? Did you know them already, or did you do research to establish that they were an Emory alum?
I actually wasn't aware that he was an Emory alum until we like sat face to face and interviewed. It was like kind of the last round. He was like, "Oh, I went to Emory," and I said, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, I went to Emory." So instead of like focusing our conversation on what I would be doing in the role and how it would fit in and things like that, we talked a lot about our different experiences as alums. He was like something that I always remember about him. He was a part of, they had a billiards club when he was at Emory, and he was really into it. So we talked a lot about that. But that connection came in handy.
Interesting. Ranjit, did you want to answer that question about professional, you know, what you imagined yourself doing and kind of what your first steps were after graduation? I know you talked a little bit about that in your introduction.
Oh yeah, I mean, I had stars in my eyes, right? So I was, I think I was working on my senior thesis was a screenplay, which you can do, by the way. It takes a couple approvals, but you can do that. So yeah, I had been working on my screenwriting. I had been doing internships in Hollywood starting around, I think that was 2006. Was my first role there, just over the summer, right? Doing summer internships. At that time, I mean, I think the rules are now a bit more restrictive in a good way, right? Because there was a lot of, a lot of unpaid internships with minimal educational benefit going around this industry. But that also meant that there was a large, you know, sort of inventory, a large number of openings regarding like a studio and development and production internships. So I had started doing those earlier on. First one was at Linda Opes Productions over at Paramount Studios, and then De Bonaventura Pictures. And then I had a similar internship, although a little bit more senior, at the Kennedy Marshall Company lined up after graduation. So I really just spent a couple months back home and then packed my bags and road tripped out to LA, found an apartment that was, roach infested, but central enough in the city to be able to access any of the studios should my job or position change. And then, started working at that intern level and just tried to do everything I could to absorb, kind of read as many scripts as I could, attend as many meetings, take incredibly copious notes, and figure out ways to provide additional value to the executives that I was working with and working for. And again, I think internships, while they're far more competitive today, there's also a lot more value, career pathing, educational benefit that factors in a lot of that. For me at the time, it was a little bit more, and for many of those that came out at the time, it was a little bit more, you had to really seek out those opportunities within the industry. But it was also a great opportunity to network. That's similar to what the other panelists have said. Networking was a huge factor. It's a tremendous factor in every industry, effectively, but media and entertainment especially. There's a lot of networking aspects. Even when applying for jobs, friends of mine, I typically recommend not just doing the cold application through any website or LinkedIn or otherwise, but rather trying to identify the hiring manager behind those roles. And I've found that most of the jobs I've gotten over time have been through that same process, is getting into direct contact there. But yeah, so pursuing those internships, and then just developing my career along the path of film development. And then, it was around, this probably goes beyond the scope of your question, but I'd say it was around 2010 that I had a pretty big career pivot. So went from focusing on film development and sort of writer, director, producer kind of career path. And I premiered a film at Sundance. And then, I just had a bit of a self-assessment that year and pivoted my interests over into the tech side of the business and kind of pursued along those lines. But I think the unique element across both is that you still have high media and entertainment relevance in not only those kind of primary, talent-focused career paths. Like everybody thinks writer, director, producer, actor, and nothing against those that pursue that. But there is an entire business, an entire community surrounding these industries that falls outside of those highly competitive positions, right? And so I think what I found is a lot of the points to the value or the benefits that I got out of my career, out of my job, came from being in one of those tangential or related areas of technology that works within the media and entertainment sector. So that's probably too long of a response for that relatively simple question.
No, I think it's really important for one thing I always talk to students about, and I'm sure you guys can speak to this as well, is that like careers are not straight lines, right? There's a lot of different, if you decide that something is not for you or it's not a right fit, you can pivot, right? It does not like you have to decide when you're still in college, this is exactly what I want to do. And then you just do it because life happens and people change and the industry changes and you pivot along with it. So I think that's really valuable to speak to. And also interesting that you did your thesis in screenwriting that early on. It is now, I should say, and thank you, Dr. Allison, for putting info in there about pursuing an honors thesis. It's much easier to do your honors thesis in screenwriting now than I think it was when you were here, thankfully. Anyway, Anjali, did you want to respond to that as well?
Yeah, I feel like internships are really important, but like looking back on it, I wasn't really doing a ton. Like it was really just to like have that on my resume. And I don't know if I necessarily learned a ton from any of my internships, but I think it's important to not have those gaps on your resume and be able to like have things to talk about, because whoever is giving you your first job, it's like everyone wants someone with experience. So I feel like it's just how you spin the time that you spent doing the internships. But I did internships in like unscripted production, like commercial production, really, really random things that had absolutely, like the Atlanta Jewish Film Festival had nothing to do with like what I do now, but it gave me good talking points when I went into like that first interview. And then the way I got my first job was through the commercial production company. There was someone that was really close with someone at a talent agency who like put me in touch with the HR people there. And so it's annoying to have to like network your way to these jobs, but that's sort of how everyone else is getting it. And there is a surprisingly large Emory LA network. And so I think like on the career website, you can just like look up people that are working in the industry and then like cold email them, reach out to them. And that's super helpful. And people are usually very willing to chat.
Great. Thank you all so much.
I just right off of that point, before I segue into the next question, Anjali and Ranjit, I know you guys talked about reaching out directly to staff members and executive members from hiring staffs. How successful and what are some tips that you have behind cold emailing or reaching out directly to those executive or staff members from particular production studios or internship programs, et cetera?
Yeah. Anjali, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, sure. I think I wouldn't email HR directly ever. Like, I would try to find someone that works at that company, even if they're not working in your like exact field or like department or position. And I would also say, if possible, reach out via email, not via LinkedIn, because I feel like it's easy to be ghosted on LinkedIn. Like, nobody uses it as much as you think they do. And then like just say that you're an Emory grad and ask for 15 minutes and for a phone call, because that's just like a very easy way to get your foot in the door. And usually when you're having these conversations, if the person feels like you're chill and normal after like the 10-minute conversation, they'll offer to pass your resume along. And so I think just being bold and then also not being offended when people don't email you back is very helpful. And doing as many as you can, just trying to meet like as many people, because you also never know if like somebody else knows someone else at a different company. And I guess just like be clear with what sort of things or opportunities you'd be interested in.
Yeah, I've had a slightly different experience with LinkedIn in particular, but I'd say the overall advice is more like figuring out, if you can, what maybe the optimal communication path is for an individual person. And you kind of like, it's tough, right? Because you can find yourself trying to get in touch with 100 different people over the course of a month or something. And that level of effort on each time can be incredibly taxing, right? And stressful as well. But if you can really do a degree of research into, sort of the business, what their priorities are, what productions they're working on, who the hiring manager is for the role, and offer something that's a bit personalized in the messaging. That's where I think that's usually one of the most helpful things, right? It speaks volumes if your first sentence has context to it in a cold outreach like that. That said, the most valuable type of introduction is one that's not cold, right? So again, it goes back to the networking piece. If you're out here already, or if you have connections within the industry, that's often the best path. But if you're doing a kind of a cold outreach cadence, my advice is, doing the level of research so that you understand the context there, and making sure not all of your applications are kind of a cookie cutter, a resend to every single contact or every single job.
Perfect. Thank you. And Sammy, before we move on, did you have anything additional to add?
I will be honest, definitely in undergrad, I was like very scared of the cold email. But once I was like, I had my first job and I was working and I had started to make like contacts in media as I was like planning to cross over. Instead of necessarily using LinkedIn or email, I would like, DM people that I was following and was kind of familiar with, maybe had conversations with, and kind of build a relationship in that way. And even if I necessarily wasn't looking for a role, I knew that not only was I potentially making a friend, but I also had a contact that I could rely on in the future.
Thank you. That perfectly sets us up for the next question, which we've talked about relationship building as well as exploring different roles and being a bit familiar with the industry that you're transitioning in. Sammy, I know you said you were familiar with media, websites and platforms. Anjali, I know you mentioned that the LA Trek that the Emory department sponsors really helped you get exposed to those business environments. And then Ranjit, I know you have talked plenty about relationship building. I'm curious about what are some of the skills that you've cultivated through receiving your humanities education, specifically within your majors, that have served you in the long run and even in the short run throughout your professional journey? Can you provide specific examples of those moments?
The media studies program was so interesting when I was a part of it because it was so new. And something that was really interesting, and I think I talked about this with Sophia previously, I was in a space where not only was I learning a lot in terms of theory and thinking more broadly outside of like kind of the narrow way I was thinking about media, but also offering different things that I knew just from like being online all day. And because social was so new as an industry, as I was like interning and then in my first roles, that kind of translated to my day-to-day work life. You know, you would have a 40, 50-year-old, you know, exec being like, hey, can we tweet this? And I'd be like, no, we can't actually. And this is kind of like going on a tangent, but thinking about how much social media has changed since I was an intern versus now, and having worked at larger companies, like we at that time, like 10 years ago, you did have interns, you know, running accounts. And now like the big like inside joke is like, oh, the intern must have sent off that bad tweet. And like now, you know, like that would never ever happen. But yeah, I think even beyond like the individual coursework, just having that back and forth relationship with professors was really important.
In terms of some of the more universal skills that were taught through that humanities education, I mean, for one, I think Sammy and Anjali maybe both mentioned this earlier on in the discussion, but that understanding of industry context and history and, you know, narrative storytelling is a huge factor in terms of any of these roles. I mean, you'll certainly run into people who don't have it, but more often than not, it means you're ahead of the curve in any given meeting. So I found that to be very valuable. But just generally speaking, and this is more to the last few years of my career, has been the writing, the storytelling, and the general communication skills are something that not as many people have proficiency in that as you'd expect sometimes. And I think it can be really helpful, right? Or it can be a helpful asset, right? To be able to, like, for example, with Amazon is a huge documentation culture, right? You write lots and lots of narratives, and you read lots of documents because, and this is very public, because the idea is that, you know, that's the best way to convey an argument or a narrative or lay out a set of facts is through that documentation process, right? So to be successful, even at a company like Amazon, requires really strong storytelling skills, right? It requires you to be able to take maybe even if you're a great speaker, taking that speech and translating it into a written document that can be conveyed while you might not even be in the room, right? That's a powerful capability that can translate between industries outside of media and entertainment alone. So I just found that, having a background in a level of say narrative storytelling or writing was very useful as my career went more so into kind of sales and marketing oriented rather than the straight kind of filmmaking field.
Yeah, I'll echo the writing aspect of it. Like everyone that applies to Amazon has to do like a writing test, and for a lot of development jobs, you have to do coverage, which is like you read a script and like write up your thoughts and your summaries. So it's basically like doing mini essays, and it's just really important to be able to succinctly and share your thoughts in a smart way that conveys who you are on paper. The writing element I think is definitely the most used.
Dr. Schreiber, before we continue, I definitely wanted to ask in regards of internship and before ultimately officially entering into the professional realm, in addition to internships and extracurricular and supporting programs, what are some ways that students before they're pre-professional can basically strengthen their skills and have that knowledge outside of academic spaces that can support them in those rooms? I know, Anjali, you talked about having a background of film terms and film vocabulary and just being familiar with a lot of the culture and education in film has helped you in those rooms. So what are some ways that students can keep that up work?
Yeah, I think another way that, depending on what industry you're going to, is like reading those industries' trades. So for Hollywood, it would be like Deadline and Variety, and you can subscribe to email updates. And that'll just help you like get into the flow of like what's going on, who's owned by who, and just get you in the habit of reading those, because that's just sort of like larger industry context that will help you both in your interviews and then also in your job.
Yeah, I'll plus one the industry trades piece. That's a huge factor, I think, in understanding, the terminology and even moreover, kind of the business side of the industry, right? Even if it's not just like there's a lot of production news that's in there as well, but understanding the economics that are behind it, especially in today's age when you have a lot of larger scale tech and telecom companies running the major studios. That's always really good strategic context to have. So definitely I'll plus one on the trades. There's a lot of other, industry texts and public materials that are out there, of course, that can help you ramp up. I was just going to say, picking up a camera, right, or powering up a screenwriting software can often be valuable, and you'll sort of learn along the way. So I participated in things like Campus Movie Fest when that was starting up at Emory. That was helpful ways to learn some of the basic terms. It's not going to teach you everything, right? But it gets you started on engaging with that community. And as I understand, it's a much bigger festival now than it was back then. So yeah, I think finding those opportunities for engaging in a practical sense can be helpful.
Thank you. And then Sammy, did you want to add anything? No pressure. You don't have to.
Oh no, I mean, there are so many things. I think when I was younger, I think blogging was really big for me in terms of like establishing a writing practice in general. And then once I got to college, I was like, okay, I don't have time for that. But writing and editing for Black Star was kind of where I put that energy. And I think in general, I was the social media manager for Teen Vogue for several years. So I had to become really adept at like what was happening in pop culture, specifically for young people, which, if you're paying attention on Twitter, you'll kind of get everything, but like having an understanding of like what the different stan groups are doing, like what are Selena's girls doing, what are the different K-pop, stands up to, things like that. And then also kind of echoing not necessarily trade publications for media, but keeping up with what's happening in the industry. It's kind of, I think across industries, it can be a kind of challenging time in terms of being like a working person, especially in the pandemic, but kind of, seeing who's unionizing and like how, management is treating their workers and like paying attention in that respect has been really important in like kind of mapping out like, okay, what do I want my career to look like? What type of place do I want to work? And what do I want my day-to-day to look like in that respect?
Thank you for that, Dr. Shiver.
Yeah, so I think I'll ask one more question to our panelists, and then I will open it up to Q&A to get some questions from the students in the room. So my question is, what do you wish you would have known when you were an Emory student?
Sure. I somehow got through my entire degree without taking any production classes or screenwriting classes. Don't really know how that happened. I assume the rules have changed. But I would try to take a production class and a screenwriting class just because it's great to know sort of like what the other side is doing. And I wish that I had been consistently reading scripts. So like if you see a pilot that you love or a movie that you love, see if you can go find the script online, just so you can sort of get into the habit of reading things in that format and like seeing how things translate to the screen and back.
That's good advice. And actually, with the new curriculum, students are required to take a production class now. So we agree that that's an integral part of a degree, of a film and media degree. So thank you for that. Ranjit, what did you wish you would have known?
I kind of mentioned this earlier, but just talking about career paths that are outside of the traditional writer, producer, director, actor fields. So I think it's a common thing for all the major art-based industries or creative industries. So whether you're looking at, say, literature, theater, podcasts, there's an entire business built around these mediums. And that means opportunities in marketing, sales, legal, human resources, technology, engineering, real estate. If you look at one of our customers like Netflix, they have all of those across the board. There's somebody that needs to manage studio operations. There's somebody that needs to manage, vendor engagement. There's somebody that needs to manage, marketing, of course, social media, et cetera. So that was really felt unknown to me, in those earlier days where I had a relative level of tunnel vision around the creative track. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. That's absolutely valid. If you feel like your heart is set on one of those roles, that's how people get those, right? Of course. But I'd also say just don't limit yourself if you have an openness to some of that other career pathing, because that's absolutely there are absolutely opportunities there, and they are hiring aggressively right now. so lots of potential.
Yeah, I agree with Anjali. I wish that I had taken a production class, especially as social is expanding, and like being able to have that technical skill set is part of the job now. I think beyond that, Ranjit and Anjali initially were talking about like cold emailing. I wish that I knew that it was okay. Like for some reason, I felt that was not okay, or like, people were going to be so mean if I hit them up. So I wish I was a little bit braver in that respect and knew like nothing bad would happen to me if I was just like brave enough to reach out, because like I had relationships with professors and I would just show up and like talk to them after class. So understanding that in a broader aspect, I think.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I'm just going to add to like the point of being scared. I like have had so many people hit me up, and like I don't feel weird about it, and it's sort of like other people have helped all of us, so it's sort of like people want to pass it forward, so most of the time people are really willing and open.
Can I jump in real quick here on this point about making connections? So I've put some links in the chat which will help you as students connect with real live Emory alums all throughout the world. So I do encourage you to check out both of those. There's a wealth of resources available to forge those connections, and it's always slightly less awkward when you have that, meaningful connection of having both gone to Emory. That's how I was able to meet these wonderful panelists tonight. And so I definitely extol the values of networking. I would just add that, we've done several of these conversations, and this topic of building connections has come up in every single one of them. And a big piece of advice that we don't want to leave on the table is, if you don't hear back from somebody right away, you are absolutely welcome to send a follow-up email a week later or a follow-up message. It's almost never a reflection of somebody not wanting to talk to you or being, upset that you reached out. People just have a lot on their plates, and I think welcome a follow-up email to be like, just want to make sure you got my message. Would love to chat with you if you have a minute. We get stuck in that little gap when we don't hear back, but do send that follow-up email or message on LinkedIn.
I also just want to chime in just very briefly. I once heard this from director, writer, and actor Issa Rae when I was in high school, but I think a really important element to practice is networking across. It's always great to network up and to see who's in your surroundings, but even networking with my peers at Emory and finding out what their interests are, what they're studying, what they plan to pursue, and really just kind of supporting them in their own pursuits, and then, you know, having that exchange back. That's a really important component that I've experienced while being at Emory, and I can foresee it for the future being a very full circle moment for me later on. So I wanted to just add that tidbit.
Yeah, so let's open it up for questions from the students that are in the Zoom room. What questions do you have for our panelists? Yeah, Anna, nice to see you.
Oh, nice to see you too. So I believe Mr. Raju was talking about like how he started with like medicine and then started doing the film classes as well. And I was just kind of curious, like what exactly made you decide like not medicine and film, because I'm in a similar position right now as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, I hated the sight of blood. So it was probably just bad decision making from the start. I mean, I guess there's some dermatology or radiology jobs, but no, I don't think it was going to work. And I made a deal with myself that was to do 2 internships, right? I did a medical internship one summer, I did a film internship the other summer, and then just see how each one turned out, right? Get some practical experience, and then understand what my mental and financial health was after each. And absolutely, from the positivity of the experience, and as far as like my engagement and where I could see a future, was absolutely on the film side. When it was a bad day for me, I could weather the worst storm when it came to film production, but the medical side, I had like 0 patience for it, right? That was a pun. Anyway, but yeah, I'm not saying that one path is better than the other. Absolutely not. But the way I evaluated it was doing my best to get some practical experience from each, talk to people that actually were working in the field, and just assess for myself like how much I liked it, how much would I be willing to pursue that, right, on the day-to-day. And it made the decision pretty clear from that point. Great question.
So I guess I have a follow-up to that. Do you ever find yourself like in a crossover between like filming something medical, or I guess you're like more on the technology side now, but like, do you ever find the crossover between the fields?
I'm sure they exist. I'm trying to think. Aside from acting like I'm the medical expert when my wife has like a cut, like less so. Like I want to be honest, right? Like because I was looking for exactly those overlap opportunities too. And then every time you'd go back and talk to your family, they'd be like, well, you want to study film? Okay, well, maybe you can film surgeries, right? And I'm like, yeah, it just wasn't, I'm sure there's a path there. I'm sure there are opportunities in that field. Nothing against those that work in there, but it hasn't been a huge part of my experience. That said, I was at a relatively early stage when it came to pre-med, right? I finished my baseline requirements. I was really into the biology stuff, not into anything else. And then I'm sure in some ways, like there are creatives that have incorporated that kind of baseline knowledge into their work, right? So you have writers, you have directors, producers, etc., that work on, say, whether it's it doesn't just have to be Grey's Anatomy or a medical drama. It can be, there's books, there's screenplays, etc., all of which require that kind of baseline knowledge. So I think there are absolutely opportunities there. It just wasn't specifically my experience of finding those overlaps.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I was wondering where you all felt like would be a good place to start looking for jobs, and like where, like, is the emailing people the best place to start, and like looking through the alumni, or is there like a place where you would recommend like going to look for the jobs, and like a site that has like listings or something like that? I was wondering because there's like so many places to look. Is there like one place to like start?
Bridget, you sound like you're in an active environment.
The cafeteria. Sorry, that's why I have my video off too.
No, it's fine. I'm sure it's giving like flashbacks to our panelists.
Yeah, I'm like, I want to see the new duck. I will start with this. So I think it is easy. The easiest way is to reach out to alum and just like tell people you're looking. And do it like the spring semester before you graduate, because sometimes these roles fill up really quickly. I wouldn't use Holly List or anything like that for entertainment specific jobs, because your resume will just sort of go into an ether. And I'll send Sophia this tracking board, which is something popular across entertainment, where they will post jobs and there will usually be an email that you can send it to. And that sort of just gives you a bit of an edge, because you're not submitting it to widest pool possible or HR. There's usually real person there vetting you.
Wow, it's changed so much since I was an undergrad. But yeah, I would definitely agree. Though I wasn't good at it back then, definitely utilize your alumni network. LinkedIn has been surprisingly useful. But I kind of use it in the sense to kind of like see what companies have openings. And then we'll go back to that company's website, see what other related ones, kind of figure out what I'm interested in, see who I can find who like works there, and then it's kind of like a covert operation. And then the New York Foundation for the Arts has a lot of roles, both full-time, part-time, internships, fellowships. And I think specifically for media, getting in on those fellowships is really helpful too, for like emerging journalists or people working across media, whether it's visuals or social. And those are all paid now. So it's a much better experience than kind of being really scrappy and trying to figure out these unpaid internships and how you're going to make ends meet.
Yeah, I'd second or third everything that my fellow panelists have said. Tracking boards are huge, right? Are a huge resource. Additionally, the tracking on social media, LinkedIn in some cases, et cetera, are incredibly helpful in finding those inroads. Absolutely utilizing the alumni network. If I could add anything to the advice that's already been given, I'd say sometimes have had success finding when a hiring manager or somebody at the company is promoting the position on social media. So just an extension of that. It again fills in that piece of context that you need to be able to go in informed. And then that way, exactly who's got some kind of a vested interest in hiring for this position, right? So you can then immediately see kind of what they've been posting about, what's their role, what's this role that they're promoting, who's the person that's hiring for it, et cetera. It just fills in so many gaps if you can find instances like that on LinkedIn or otherwise, where there are those mentions. So it can be a helpful way in, but again, that's sort of a side note to everything that's already been said.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I see there's a question in the chat from Michael. He asked, what is your take on grad school, especially for the writer, director, producer track? Thoughts on that, going to grad school in these fields as opposed to going right out into the industry after graduation? Anjali, do you want to start?
I do have like ridiculously strong opinions on this, unless you're
Which are not those of Amazon, right?
Yeah, they're not those of Amazon. Unless you're like really, really loaded and you can graduate from one of these programs without debt, I would not do it. They are great community builders and they definitely give you a lot of skills. But I think the biggest thing they give you is just a network, which you can build on your own by working in the industry. I would say just try to find jobs that are like more specifically aligned to what you want to do. So if you want to work in production, you can start as a PA, and that will give you a really, really similar experience to grad school. And even like working at an agency, a lot of my friends at the agency ended up wanting to be writers and working for showrunners, and sort of they're coming up that way, but they're being paid. So I think grad school is for some people, but it's definitely a hefty investment of both your time and your money.
I'm thinking about grad school right now. And to echo Anjali, I am only going if it's paid for, whether that's through work or if it's fully funded, or some sort of grant or fellowship, because the debt is real.
Yeah, I got the same thing, right? I think these grad programs, I mean, if you're going writer, producer, director track, right, something like that, you can look at things like the Peter Stark program at USC and get into some of these, very prestigious programs. Emory has a great program, of course, from the business side of things as well. So there's some value there too. But yeah, I think the primary value is building your network, right? Which I just I don't want to undersell that. Building the network is incredibly valuable, right? Like that in and of itself is a great thing. But the other folks here, other panelists are right in saying that you can build that on your own. It is possible. If grad school were of a lower cost, I'd be more inclined to strongly recommend it, but yeah, not at the expense of incurring years upon years of debt, is usually kind of how I get in there. So you got to have the right financial plan for going into grad school, and also a really good game plan in terms of what you want to study, what you would want to gain from it, even if it's like outside of the network piece alone. If there's a very specific program, a school that is very much known for it, and it's going to teach you exactly what you need to be on just that track, then great. If you are more, sort of questioning that career path and looking for it as sort of an exploratory option, the way that a more college or a liberal arts degree can sometimes be framed, then I think that's possibly going to be more difficult to manage with the grad school path. But there, you really, like, depends on who you ask. A lot of the time, I see 10 opinions on this a day, so it's it's all over the place. But yeah.
I will say that like working at an agency is always pitched as like entertainment grad school. And so that's like sort of what hooked me. I was like, oh, okay, I can go sort of learn a little bit about everything and then figure it out from there.
Yeah, second that as well. Agencies, agent trainee programs, you name it, those can be great proving grounds for media and entertainment.
And I would also just throw out there as a follow-up, obviously I haven't necessarily experienced it, but I think also students need to know that you have to start at a very entry-level job in the film and media industries generally, right? I mean, you're an assistant, right? Often to somebody, and that's how you work your way up, right? So generally you don't enter into the industry as an agent, you're an agent's assistant, right? And it strikes me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that going to grad school doesn't, for in those areas, doesn't necessarily put you in any better position. You would still start out as an assistant, likely, right? Because that's just sort of like,
yes.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I said 100% yes. Like you can go to grad school and then still start in these same positions that other people are starting in. And yeah, you definitely, especially the agency route, start from the very bottom. Like I was literally in a mailroom, like sorting fan mail for Kim Kardashian. Like it was not glamorous. There were no windows. Like it wasn't cute. But you do that for a couple months and then like you slowly work your way up. And I'm like still an assistant, still like answer people's phones. But like as you build trust, you get to like do more of the creative stuff that you want to eventually do.
Thank you. Erin, we'll transition on to your question.
I just have a really quick and direct question. I forget who it was who brought it up specifically, but they said that getting involved or getting familiar with like screenwriting software can be really helpful when applying for things or when approaching the industry. So I haven't taken any screenwriting classes yet, but I was wondering like what kind of software is best to use, because I know that there are some that are like super costly, and like, is it like what's worth it making an investment or not?
Yeah, and I probably shouldn't say this in a public forum, but I'm going to. And again, just noting, I'm not speaking for my company here. But yeah, I think I pirated a copy of Final Draft back in the day, and not necessarily recommending that for anybody. But there are Microsoft Word formatting, plugins you can put in there to just give you the screenwriting format to make it a little bit easier. It's not going to be as smart an application, but it's gonna do the job, right? I think there's, yeah, as Anjali's saying, I know there's free or lower cost options that are now out there to compete with the monolith that at one point was Final Draft. So I'd say, yeah, probably. Well, let's just do that. Hey, Anjali, do you have a better answer for this?
I think Celtex is free, or there's like a free version. So try that. And then once you know you're definitely going to be a writer, I would consider buying Final Draft as like an investment in yourself for the future, because that is definitely still what everyone uses.
Yeah.
They have student discounts, I imagine. I mean, I'm sure that's still not cheap right?
Yeah.
So maybe while you're, while you still have an EDU email address, you could take advantage of those discounts. Sorry, Alexis, you were saying.
Oh no, I was just affirming what you were saying. They do have student discounts, and usually I think they also have like additional sales, like especially around the holidays and periodically throughout the calendar year. So just finding that those times is helpful.
I'll also just note, because we talked about kind of the industry research and trade publications perspective, there are also software, sites like IMDb, of course, and Studio System, all of whom offer student pricing. I believe IMDb still offers student pricing. I'd have to double check. And Studio System, I know, does as well. They just don't publish against it. But it's, yeah, there are options out there to get lower cost access to basically research portals to understand everything that's going on day to day from, say, a talent representation standpoint, production standpoint, production statuses, you name it. So a lot of, I mean, Anjali, if you're able to say, what are you using day to day on your desk?
Yeah, Studio System is definitely the one that is the most used. But when I was applying to jobs, I was using someone else's IMDb Pro. So I think just when you're starting out, IMDb Pro is good, but then once you're more in the development world, Studio System is the way to go. I don't really know how much it is. I think it's really expensive. So if there's like a way to crowdsource it or, do it through the department, that would probably be ideal.
Yeah, it's that's what I was saying. It's like you can crowdsource it, or it can be expensive because it's designed for studios and agencies and production companies, but they do have student pricing if you come in with an EDU account. So that used to be my job. was working on the Studio System software side. So yeah, they definitely have that. I think you have to reach out to somebody over at Nielsen right now, double check if they still offer it, but they should.
So I think someone asked if grad school for business is a good choice to make.
Thank you, Anjali.
I have no idea, so I'm gonna let someone else take that.
Anybody else have, Ranjit, do you have any thoughts about going to grad school Sammy, going to grad school for business as maybe putting you in a better place for jobs if you want to go into the business side of the industry?
Yeah, I think it can. I mean, what I've seen from the business side, right, of the industry, did that come off right? I don't know, from the business end. Anyway, it's so I feel like practical experience tends to trump all, right? That tends to be the most valuable thing. But business school can be very valuable when it comes to, I'd say, sometimes there's greater promotability in organizations, in the larger organizations. If those orgs are mostly looking at resumes, that's not all of the companies today, right? A lot of companies are moving away from that kind of model, but I definitely have seen that happen, right? I think if you also want to pivot or have the ability to move into other lines of business. Like, let's say you got a position working at Warner Brothers, right? And you then decided that Warner Brothers wasn't really the right fit for you, and you wanted to switch over to Salesforce. There are absolutely Salesforce positions where an MBA would be incredibly valuable, and they could be media and entertainment related. They could be not media and entertainment related, right? But you'd have that ability to maneuver into another industry and not have to start back at a base level. So the MBA piece can be really valuable from that perspective. I know we're on an Emory call, so I'll plug Goizueta, but also that there are some low cost, sort of online MBA options out there that personally I pursued just to check the box on the resume, right? Because it got me a little bit of that freedom of movement. But yeah, the larger MBA programs, you're getting that as well as the network that comes with it. So it's similar to kind of the film grad school piece of it as well.
All right. Well, Sophia. So I was going to ask about the value of the humanities to business work, but actually, you kind of were getting there in your answer, Ranjit. So I'll pivot and ask a different question instead that I think might be fun. So in a conversation we recently had in the German Studies department, one of the panelists reflected on how valuable what she felt like was a tedious exercise at the time has since become in her professional life. And she was talking about, in a language class, you are sitting with a partner and you're constantly asking each other questions in a language and, how many siblings do you have? What's your birthday? Where are you from? What's your major? But she said that repeating those exercises really helped her be a sharp and active listener. And so I'm curious from you, are there particular assignments or exercises or activities you did in the classroom or in your homework after class that have resonated for you in a similar way, maybe even unexpectedly? And then if not, we would just love to hear a little bit more about a favorite memory from a class or favorite assignment that you had when you were a student.
This was not a media studies class or film and media studies class. But one of the classes I took in WGSS this is so typical across humanities, but for every reading, we had to do a response, which I hated. I was like, you know what I read and we can talk about it. But kind of breaking down a chapter or a whole book into kind of a 250 to 500 word response. Really made sure that I was understanding the information and then also could have a conversation about it. And because my job is kind of breaking down large pieces of information into 240 characters, or just choosing the best picture and the headline, or choosing that headline and being this is what we're going with, this is how we communicate the information, was deeply important for sure.
It's a very hard question because I feel like I've blocked out a lot of the tedious tasks I've had to do. But I think my job is very reading heavy. People aren't necessarily asking you to read since it's the assistant level. Sometimes it's you just have to tell them that you are already doing the work. So in contemporary film theory, I think Dr. Reynolds was our professor, and nobody was doing the reading because it's all very dense and very difficult. But I was this is legit embarrassing when he asks everyone their thoughts and no one has thoughts on things. So I think doing the difficult reading for that every single class and trying to take notes on it and coming up with questions, even if they were dumb questions, has really helped throughout my job, because it's you have to present to your boss that you are not just an assistant, you're a person with a brain that has thoughts, that wants to do bigger things than expenses and answering the phone. I think reading a lot and then being able to ask questions and form your own thoughts about the reading, even when it's complicated, was really helpful.
Getting back to, I'd say maybe the screenwriting piece of it, and really trying to kind of train that as a muscle. I remember this one exercise this was Professor Bill Brown in his intro to screenwriting class. And he has a part of that class where there's a bunch of different exercises that he did in that one that were a lot of fun and that teach you a bit more about the business. So like one is like he kind of gives you some base elements and makes you pitch a story idea, right? Or pitch a film or a TV idea based around those elements. And you have to give like essentially a 1-minute pitch and see like, does it meet the kind of producer, meet the bar from a producer standpoint as to something that is deserving of maybe a treatment being written on it. So I thought that was a fun one, but one that sticks out in my head was, I remember he asked us to take a scene from a movie, and it was just, a 5-minute scene. But you needed to, everybody got assigned a different film to do. And then you had to fire up the screenwriting software, whatever method you could. We didn't get anything, pre-baked, so you had to do it in Microsoft Word or whatever. And then you had to copy down, just by watching the scene, what you thought the screenplay said, right? And then he would grade that as far as how well you captured it, or really like what would be in the screenplay, what wouldn't, and provide those notes back. And I thought that was really valuable. And the class ended with, you have to write act 1 of a film, right? So that was valuable in and of itself. That class in general, I have a lot of fun memories, fun exercises from that one.
Okay. So this question is coming from Madison, and she asks, how do you recommend to best present your how do you recommend to best present yourself and your skills that you have from school to get those first jobs where you are hoping to gain more experience?
There's a lot of ways to do it. I think for me, like the very basic thing was like, okay, I need a resume template. I need a cover letter template to figure out how to express myself in the most like formal fashion. I also, I don't have one anymore, but when I first graduated, I had a website to kind of like gather all my writing clips, my social media work. And now, especially if you're going in the media direction, there's like Muckrack, which like gathers all of your clips from different websites, or Contently. Squarespace is easy to use. I think there's Cargo, which is a little bit cheaper if you want to present yourself in that way. And to be frank, I've gotten a lot of jobs just because of people like following me on Twitter and thinking I'm funny and reaching out in that respect. So like finding a way to express yourself in a public fashion, whether that's a website or a newsletter, or blogs are coming back too, or social media. All of those kind of like elevate just the basic resume and cover letter.
Anjali or Ranjit?
Yeah, I feel like definitely don't underestimate just like telling them that you're a really hard worker and that you're basically like willing to do anything and just any job. And then the other thing that has been helpful, I think, when you leave school is like picking something specific, like a project that you worked on over a long period of time, and sort of like extrapolating whatever skills you had from that and bringing it into the working world. And then when you're applying for the jobs, make sure you're looking at whatever the criteria is and like tailoring your resume to whatever it says on the hiring page.
Yeah, I'd second tailoring the resume for sure. It's even what I did at one point is you take all of the terms that you think that if you're applying into one of these large scale job application platforms, take all of the terms that you think the job is meant to hit, take specific key terms from the job description and throw them on white text and put them in the bottom of your resume, because then the auto scan technology will scan those words and pull your resume out of the pile. So it's just if you're applying to one of those companies. But the other thing is, we mentioned it earlier, I think yes, it's about presenting yourself, but it's presenting yourself in the context often of what the job's looking for as well. Certainly don't lose yourself in it, make sure it's something that you actually want. But I think, yeah, it goes back to like, if you can show a little bit, even if it's in one sentence, that you've done your research, that resonates huge, right? I feel like that's the first thing that a lot of us look for when hiring anybody is, okay, is this kind of like a form intro? What are you asking from me? What would you like me to do? Where do you need help? But rather, do you know anything? Are you empathizing with my position, right? Is what hiring people think of, right? So if you can show that, like if you can check those boxes, but rather show that you understand their business a little bit or have a curiosity about it and can work that into an intro or to an application, I think it goes back to customizing the resume, customize the cover letter, but just customize your communication to a degree. It takes that little bit of extra work, but it elevates you above so many other people that are just, mass applying.
Okay, great. Yeah, Maddie asked, how would you recommend going about researching a company before applying? So using the research skills that you've gained in the department, but at what sites would you go to? I know you guys have recommended a number of industry focused sites. What are your thoughts? Where's a good first place to go?
I was gonna say, do like a just deep Google stalk, like Google their name, like try to get as specific as possible. Like I've fully stalked people on Instagram before, just to like try to get their vibe before you meet with them. Like if you know they have a dog, you can bring up that you like dogs. Like I think as specific as you can get is always helpful. And like I'm sure all of you have excellent stalking skills. So I would just do that as much as possible.
Wait, I have a quick question about that. Will they consider that creepy, or is it generally like well regarded?
Not bring it up that you did it, but it's just for like you to know and for you to like form the connection. Definitely don't tell them that you've stalked them. It'll just like help give you context.
Like maybe don't say, how's Fluffy doing? But you can say, I love dogs. I got my rescue. Do you have any dogs? Right? Like there's ways in which to frame it as a question. That's more like interview stuff, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, for my job at AWS, this is certainly overkill, but I think it's Amazon has a kind of renowned kind of hiring practice, right? And I just composed a binder, part of which was individual profiles on all the people that were interviewing me, including background social media research and their careers up to that point and any public comments. So it's you can get pretty deep if you want to in that research aspect. You certainly do not have to go to that level, but it just speaks to again, there's lots of resources out there. We've listed a few in the chat that you can reference for trying to get some of that background detail. I find most often like I'm a little biased because this is for jobs that I'm usually circulating around. Doesn't apply to everybody, but understanding that high level business context. So let's say you're applying to Netflix. It's valuable to understand what that hiring manager is looking at from, say, let's say they're in the VFX team, right? And you're hiring for a VFX intern position. It's interesting to be able to know what they're focused on. Then beyond that, okay, what's the overall production slate for Netflix, like from a VFX standpoint? Going beyond that, all right, what's the production slate for the whole business? How do those film productions tie in with television productions, games productions, and consumer products offerings, right? And then going a level higher, all right, what's the CEO talking about today and where's the stock number, right? How does their current content budget impact the decision-making going over the next year, right? You don't necessarily have to go into all this level of depth, but it's good context, which means that if you can get that first call and then you can get an interview going, right? You come in already looking like you understand this business throughout and you already work for them, right? That's the best interviews you can have are the ones where they were like, it felt like they were already working for me, therefore, right? So I think that can go a long way.
Thank you all for those responses. We actually received one last question, which I think would be a great way to end this discussion. But Hadley asks, I know we talked a lot about business and preparedness, but if I can ask about some quick anecdotes, what has been a great moment / story from a current or past job?
I think just in general, when I was at Teen Vogue, just like making really close friends. I can't think of anything specific that we did. Um, this is kind of like sad and terrible, but working in media, like there's a lot of late nights. So kind of like rallying around each other and like, if we need to stay till 10 p.m. because we have, a cover coming out tomorrow, kind of like working it out together, ordering food and then like making sure everybody gets home. But in general, like building really close relationships with people.
There was so one getting to, I premiered a film at Sundance. That was kind of a career highlight. Very exciting, very fun, right? Got to meet a lot of people. The cast on that movie was great. And just, working in that business day to day in general was exciting. I'd say more recently, I'm trying to think, there's a few examples. Most recently for AWS, I presented at a major conference last year around, this is going to get probably too technical and in depth, but there's a whole thing on like artist workstations and VFX and animation, and kind of imagining a film studio in the cloud, right? That's the terminology, is studio in the cloud that everybody uses. And I guess just to simplify it, the way that technology exists today for the typical film studio is that you have to use that like locally, right? As in, okay, the studio is based in Los Angeles, our technology is based in Los Angeles, our artists therefore have to be based in Los Angeles. So whether you're a director or a VFX animator or anybody from a technical artistry field or just a general production field, you have to be kind of localized there, right? And there are remote productions, but then there's lots of like shipping technologies and data back and forth around countries, around the world. So this idea of studio in the cloud enables this basically a global framework for technology that really democratizes it, right? We're talking about how much final draft costs. What if they could just, democratize access to technologies for creators and have them be accessible by anybody around the world at any given time on a momentary, say, usage basis. That way, the person living in, I'm from Kentucky, so I'll use that. The person living in Kentucky that really wants to be a VFX artist can apply the exact same amount of resources and artistic capability as somebody living in Los Angeles or New York or Toronto or London, et cetera. Right. So anyway, I'm getting into a bit of a rabbit hole here, but it's just very exciting to be part of technology on that level that is going to, I think it'll eventually change the entire sort of media and entertainment content creation landscape. I was also on a virtual production stage recently, so that was the other one I was trying to think of. That was exciting. Anyway, that's everything.
Very cool. Thank you.
Anjali, did you want to chime in just before?
Yeah, there's not a lot of like very glamorous moments, but like when we were back in office and I was working at the agency, like it was very fun to see all the celebrities go by and like have to play it cool, but be like, oh my God, John Hamm is in the bathroom over there. Like fun little things like that, sort of like keep you going through the day to day. Like would never want to work in talent relations, but it's always exciting.
Much for this, for your wonderful responses. This has been such a valuable event.